Hi, nice to be here again. I want to say thanks so much to everybody that's been doing these talks. Again, it's been so interesting to hear what everybody has to talk about, and so much of a variety of different things that we all have to share. It's really cool, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to keep this going at least maybe a year or so. We'll see how we go. I guess we might need to have a break over the holidays or something like that. But it would be really nice to keep this going for a while. I know that once a week can be quite a lot, but I don't know, I find it really fun, and it's really nice if we can spread it around. I have asked a bunch of people if they'd like to be involved, and I know there's so many more that I could ask, so if anybody is interested in having a go at this, would love to hear from you. You really could talk about anything that you like. Hi, Chris. But yeah, there's lots of things to say, and what I wanted to talk about tonight is memory and mnemonic devices and the way that we use them in paganism, especially with the idea of the circle. This idea came to me because I was thinking, what can I talk about tonight? And thinking, oh no, I can't remember what I've already talked about. And so I thought, oh, but you know, we used to, I mean, the Druids anyway, the ancient Druids used to have an oral tradition. And I thought it would be interesting to talk about, you know, what would it be like if you had an oral tradition? And do we in some ways actually have an oral tradition? And how does, you know, our understanding of sort of visual cues like the circle relate to that oral learning that isn't necessarily all about checking back in with a book, like some of the scriptural parts might be more about, you know, always referring back to a Bible or, you know, that sacred text type thing. It's more about, you know, what are our systems like for memory in paganism and Druidry in particular, I suppose. And yeah, so these talks, I guess, you know, it's an opportunity for us to chat. I know Philip was talking about it on the Tea with a Druid ones, about how nice it is just to sit down and have a chat with someone. Somehow that's a wonderful way of learning. And I was thinking about that as well, and how nice it is that we can have this experience. But obviously there's good points and bad points to it. This isn't just sitting down to read a book. You know, it's not a structured thing, and it's not something that we might go back to lots of times, or, you know, it can be harder to go back to a video, but we are recording it. So in some ways there is this sense of like not wanting to repeat yourself. But I think that in the past, like the ancient Druids, they would have repeated themselves quite a lot. They had to, because that's, you know, one of the ways that we learn, through repetition. And I think it was Caesar that said, I just wrote the quote somewhere. Oh no, there it is. Caesar said that the Druids wouldn't write any of their teachings down, but that many poems would be learned over as much as 20 years of study. So mostly it was poems, and he specifically said poems. So like they were learning orally. They did use some writing, apparently. He said that they wrote some things down in Greek, but when it came to their teachings, it was all oral learning. So you would sit and you think, how would that happen? How could you actually learn that? And why poems? And one of the reasons I think is because, you know, when we think about how we learn, obviously repetition is important. Listening to something over and over again, it does get sunk into your head. And songs definitely get sunk into our heads more deeply than other kinds of words. Some people are quite good at learning quotes, so maybe that works too. But that sing-song experience of something, have you ever been driving along in the car and suddenly a song comes on the radio and you find yourself singing along, you know, all the words, and you think, I haven't heard this song for years. But there's something in us that makes us remember something that's in that poetic form, in that song form. So I think that's one of the reasons why they might have been teaching things in the form of poems and songs. And I think that's fascinating. So there's also, you know, like how do we hold so much information if we had an oral culture? How do we, you know, if you don't write anything down, how do you pass things on and maintain it? How do you keep that information structured and keep it going through generations or, over time? How do you maintain it? And I think one of the most important things is kind of visual cues or these mnemonic devices. And obviously, like, visual cues are quite easy to understand, I think, for a lot of us. When we look at a photo or something from our childhood, it might remind us of a whole house that we lived in or a whole day's experience. But without that visual cue, it can be hard to remember things. If you see that picture over and over again, that memory gets solidified. Like having these little markers of memory can help quite a lot. And we do have little symbols like that as well in paganism. We have little images and symbols that help us to understand entire concepts. So maybe the Arwen symbol with the 3 drops and the 3 rays representing the 3 drops of Arwen, and the whole story comes to your mind in looking at that. Or the 3 rays representing the stations of the sun. You can imagine how that sunrise at different times of the year creates those different lines. And so, just a little picture can bring up this whole idea, that we have learned as an oral culture, which I think is really interesting. And then there's the sensory whole experience that we place in things. And I think when we think about the circle and we think about our experiences through the year, we there's so much that we can place in that circle. It's almost hard to know where to start. We place the directions, help us understand where we are in space and time. In time because of like the movement of the sun around that circle and how we understand that. We might assign elements to the different directions. We might have it in one way or the other depending on which hemisphere we're in. They're kind of like, it becomes like a map, and within that there's so many layers that you can add in there and that you've already probably been working on, or you will if you are just getting into Druidry or paganism. And there's the circle becomes this, it's like the map for the mnemonic device, right? So a mnemonic device, if you don't know, is like a thing that has symbols in it that you use to remember things. So I've been learning about it a bit with looking at this book called The Memory Code by Lynn Kelly. It's really interesting, and she's Australian, and she talks about the oral cultures and how they use mnemonic devices to store information. And she's comparing living oral cultures like Aboriginal culture and how they use song lines, basically using the landscape as a mnemonic device, so that each landform, holds a story. Like this is the Wombat Rock, and that's the river where the eel is, or they use certain parts of the landscape to tell the story, and within that story there's a whole series of other correspondences that explain resources and social law and all kinds of things. Like the whole system is embedded in these stories that work on loads of different layers, and the landscape itself is holding those stories in it. And I think in paganism we probably would, obviously we can look at Aboriginal stories if those are available in our areas, but and we would probably have, I feel like there would be something similar to be understood in the stories that were told in in Celtic lands as well, and it probably got lost along the way, that there would have been more information in these myths other than just this happened and then this happened and this happened, because they would have, a lot of them are in places with specifically named landmarks and things like that, and maybe there was information about where to find water or what food was there or which people lived there, and things like that. So story itself and the way that it fits into the landscape can be a mnemonic device in itself. But I think in modern paganism what's become more important is the idea of the circle, the sacred circle, as a story, and the wheel of the year as it sits in that circle becomes a really rich story for understanding our journey through the year, but also where we place certain concepts through our year, like, in Philip Crogom's Druid Mysteries book, I know some of these have probably come out turned around, so sorry about that. But yeah, and also obviously in some of the OBOD work, there's the concept of, but he does talk about it in this book, so it's public information. But he talks about the Samhain Beltane cross, section of the Wheel of the Year being about ancestors, and the sort of ancestors leaving or the ancestors arriving in those times, and also there was the tribe ones at Imolc and Lunasa, that's about the people kind of working together with the harvest and the spring and the planting and the that kind of thing. And then there's space and time and the journey and the center. Like there's all these concepts that can be placed within that concept of the circle, and it becomes really rich. And the more that we work with it, and the more that we imagine, I suppose, being in that circle space and looking around it, and understanding where we're placing those different things, the more that mnemonic device of the circle can help us to understand, well, our tradition, really. I suppose that's where we're placing it. Like nearly everything that we come across, I mean, not everything, but quite a lot, can be placed within that circle idea. And obviously there are other things that we can work with, different symbols and ideas that relate to each other. I find the idea of land, sea and sky and the triquetra symbol quite interesting, in how many different ways I can understand that 3-in-1 concept and how it relates to land, sea and sky. That's another mnemonic device that I use for memorizing things. So yeah, I find it really interesting. I'd be really interested to hear, what other things you put in there. Obviously, there's more to it than that. There's, the seasonal changes are so diverse, and it's not just what we find in books. And it's, obviously things, I'm really passionate about looking at your local Wheel of the Year and understanding what your local seasons are doing and how that story can play into the circle as well. And it's, almost like you're adding layers of timing and meaning to all these different directions. We might think of animals and plants that relate to the elements, and which directions we place those in might be significant. We might, like Beck was talking about, herbs and weeds and things, things that we can forage, and knowing where they are around us in the circle, maybe spatially, but also what time of year they're arriving. And so thinking about that wheel as a timing device. And so it's like you can almost imagine looking at each direction that you go around the circle. There's a whole load of different things that will be there for you, like almost like you can build this image, and some of the stories move around the whole thing. So, the different stories of the life cycle, or different stories of mythology that you fit in different places, and there's so much in that it's almost impossible for me to talk about all of this at once. But yeah, I think it's worth thinking about the value, I guess, of that circle concept, and how that can be used more as a way of having oral teaching and understanding how we're putting things together in our memories, how things get remembered. Because even if we do read things, we're going to be placing it into our memory in some way that, works with that mnemonic device. That circle positioning can help us to, understand it better in ourselves because we can see it. So, there's a bunch of other things that we could look at to add layers to that circle as well, like different things happening in our gardens, obviously, different things happening with the seasons. There's, if you're into astrology and understanding when timing of different things happens through the year, that could be part of it as well. Or you might find there's local cultural activities or something that happens every year at the same time, and it's like we're building our own understanding of what the Wheel of the Year is, not just in that sense of that traditional Wheel of the Year, but in a really deep way and very personal way as well. So other things might be travel or things that are happening agriculturally, family birthdays, public holidays or local events, that sort of thing. There's so many things that could be happening. And it's almost like there's, you know, our pagan one, there's your local, you know, certain things that are happening, or your own personal things that are happening. And then you wonder about like the idea of it being a global mnemonic device. Like, what is the idea of the sacred circle for us as a global pagan community? And how do we understand that in different places and at different times for different people? And I think that's just fascinating, because you can meet somebody else that that understands this concept, that lives in a completely different place to you and, you know, has a very different life. But if we talk about the idea of the circle, oh, where do you place fire? Oh, where do you, you know, which season is your flowering time? Or, you know, like just thinking about, you know, those comparisons, it can actually be a really fascinating thing to see those differences. So with 4 minutes to go, I would like to do a meditation on the idea that basically we all understand this concept of the sacred circle, but we're all experiencing it in different ways in our different places around the world. So because there might be some people listening to this who are in other countries, I'm not going to assume everybody is in Australia, I've made this really broad. So if you'd like to join me, we're just going to meditate on our feeling of the circle. And because I've been talking, I'm going to take a few deep breaths. So if you'd like to join me, just taking a few deep breaths yourself and coming into your center. Feel that sense of the circle around you. That space of the directions around you. If you have a general feeling for where the directions are, that would be helpful. It's not necessary, just go with your intuition. If you can feel the place of sunrise, and imagine that sun rising in that spot, and that's the place of springtime and flowering. And then feel the place of the height of the sun at midday. This is also the place of summertime. Perhaps you can see that bright midday sun there. Perhaps you see the fiery energy or the abundance of the garden. And it's also the time when the sun starts to decline. And then feel towards the place of sunset. That's the place of the autumn and the harvest. And what that means for you, perhaps there's mushrooms or foraging to be done. Maybe it's a time of rain or mist, a time of gathering, preparing, but perhaps a time of peace after the heat. And then place your attention to the darkness, the place where it's darkest, where the sun is gone, where it's midnight, the place of winter and rest and cold. And feel those directions around you. What other symbols you might place there. And what symbols you might place between them. And then feel the sky above you and what that means for you. Feel the earth below you, how it holds you. Feel the space of the whole circle around you and out to the seas, on the shores, in the distance. Feel that that circle is always around you. You're always within its cycles. Cycles of day and night. Cycles of the year through the seasons. Cycles of your lifetime. And cycles of projects and work that we do in our lives. And perhaps you notice other cycles too. And that circle, it's so full of stories and lessons and magic. Each direction and each point between. There's whole worlds to be explored. In meditation, we can take any one of those paths and find the wisdom and the story that's forever unfolding. So just coming back into your body, finding your center again. Yeah. It's there all the time. I think, that sense of our center and the space around us and how everything's moving with us all the time. And how we can share that idea with others. And compare our ideas and our experiences of it to get an even deeper, full understanding of that. So, yeah, I just wanted to share that with you. And if you're doing one of these in the future and you forget what it was you were saying last time, it's totally fine, because if it was an oral tradition where we couldn't record these, it wouldn't matter, because repetition is important for learning. So I hope you enjoyed this, and yeah, let me know if you'd like to do one too. See ya.